Good morning and peace be upon you this beautiful day, wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Qasim Rashid, and this is the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're listening on Substack, then thank you, and make sure you hit that subscribe button so that we can keep creating this content. If you're listening on Sirius XM, wonderful to have you tune in. Also, hit that subscribe on Sirius XM and continue to support our show. We've got a pretty amazing show lined up. Not that any show is not amazing, but this show I'm particularly excited about. We've got two amazing guests today. Yasmine Taeb is an Iranian American human rights lawyer and political legislative director at Empower Change. She's going to talk to us about what's happening in Iran, how we can stop this war, and how do we meaningfully support the Iranian people. There's all this talk about, well, Iranians don't like the regime either, so we need to tear down the regime, and that's just nonsense. Yes, they don't like the regime either. That doesn't mean they want a foreign government to violently invade and bomb the crap out of it. So stop that, cut that out. And Yasmin is going to talk about what we can do to actually support the Iranian people. That doesn't involve a massive war of aggression. And then also a returning guest, my old friend Tim Whitaker, founder of the New Evangelicals, is going to be here. And Tim, if you followed his work, does just a brilliant job of separating Christianity from Christian nationalism and helping us understand how we can fight back against this right-wing evangelical extremism that's basically taken hold of our government and causing just insane amounts of death and destruction. But some good news, you've probably heard by now that Zoran Mamdani, a 33-year-old Democratic Socialist Muslim American immigrant from Uganda, no less, is the Democratic nominee for mayor in New York City. He took down powerhouse former Governor Andrew Cuomo by a significant margin. In the first round, he was already up 8 points, I think like 44 to 36 or something like that, which is just wild. It's incredible because when you think about all the people that Cuomo had backing him, he had Michael Bloomberg, who's worth 100 some billion dollars, gave him, I don't know, 8 to 15 million, something absurd in a super PAC. He had Bill Clinton, for God's sake. He had Kirsten Gillibrand supporting him, Richie Torres. He had the entire Democratic establishment, Jim Clyburn supporting him. He had the New York Times saying, "Do not rank Mamdani." I mean, the New York Times actually flat out said to New Yorkers, "Do not rank Mamdani for any reason." And what did New Yorkers do? They gave a middle finger to all those folks. They said to Bill Clinton, your presidential endorsement means nothing. Said to New York Times, you being the paper of record, so-called, means nothing. Told Michael Bloomberg, take your billions, get out, go elsewhere. We don't want you here. Bloomberg, a former mayor, three-term mayor of New York City, is told to go elsewhere. This is a major shift. This is a major shift because it is, to me, an expression of what working people want. Mamdani, and we had one of his directors on last week. Mamdani ran on the platform of economic populism. We should have, free public transportation, free childcare, a rent freeze. Let's reallocate the police budget so that police can focus on violent crime and the stuff that they're being asked to do, like mental health work and social justice work. Let's actually allocate that budget to the people who are experts in that, a proven model that's worked all around the country. Let's increase funding to combat anti-Semitism and Islamophobia by 800%. Brilliant. I mean, this is the kind of people-focused mentality that our elected officials need to have, but don't have because they're all funded by billionaires. And here comes Mamdani, a 33-year-old immigrant Muslim from Uganda, democratic socialist, proudly a socialist, proudly a Muslim, leaning into his identity, into his culture, just running a brilliant campaign and being completely unapologetic. And this is the end result. He wins by a landslide. And now, he's going to be up for the general in November against Eric Adams. And I just know, unfortunately, that the billionaires are going to go nuts getting behind Adams despite his corruption, despite his hypocrisies. But this is the world in which we live. And so we're going to try to talk more about this in the coming shows. But I did want to acknowledge that this is historic. It was the many over the money. And I think it's a model that other progressives and working families focused candidates can endorse, can embrace to be successful as well. All right, when we come back from break, I'm going to be excited to bring on Yasmine Taeb, a brilliant human rights lawyer, Iranian American, who's going to speak about her experience in the space and what we can do to stop war with Iran. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We'll be right back with Yasmine Taeb and Tim Whitaker after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. I'm extraordinarily excited about our guest this week. He's an old friend and a brilliant human rights lawyer and progressive activist named Yasmine Taeb. And we're talking about Iran. Yasmine fled Iran during the Iran-Iraq War, grew up undocumented before becoming a U.S. citizen, a brilliant human rights lawyer and activist, has run for office before. In 2016, she became the first Muslim woman elected to the DNC. She's worked in the space for nearly 2 decades now and just has a brilliant repertoire. If I read her entire bio, it would be the entire show. And I want to get her on here. Yasmine, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks so much, Qasim. Really appreciate it.
Your story is the quintessential American dream when I think about that. I mean, I'm a fellow immigrant myself. I was never undocumented, but what you bring to the table demonstrates even more emphatically than I think any other kind of person in modern day America why demonizing immigrants just because they don't have some special magical piece of paper is cruel, is fascistic, is destructive to how great our country truly can be. I'd love for you to, before we dive into the kind of substance, I'd love for you to just to kind of share your experience growing up undocumented, what that process was like, and what a lot of folks today are feeling who are maybe in similar shoes.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. I mean, right, like my family was lucky in the sense that we at the time that we came in, we benefited from President Reagan's, and this is what they refer to as his like amnesty
Mhm.
program.
Yeah,
So we were, even though, I mean, our story is honestly as tragic as it is, it's very similar to other asylum seekers, refugees who are fleeing violence and persecution in their own countries. We came through the southern border. I mean, it's a very kind of long story.
yeah,
The way we kind of fled from Iran, went to Turkey. We were staying in motels for like several months, trying to find a way to come to the U.S. legally, because my
Mhm.
father, he was a physician here in the States. He was here. We couldn't join him.
Yeah,
We didn't have any visas, nothing. And it was right at the time when my brother, who's older than me, he was like 14, 15 at the time, he was about to get drafted to the
wow,
Iran-Iraq war. Yeah. So it was like one of those situations people think like these families that take these journeys, like why are they taking these risks? Because obviously my mom figured that the risk of leaving, fleeing, and trying to come to the US to be reunited with my dad was a better chance of like
Mm,
being able to live. Like it was an alternative to
yeah,
what she saw as like an ultimate death for my brother.
yeah,
So yeah, so I mean, thankfully, I was able, I mean, we got detained for a bit at the border. We were actually apprehended on the US side by US authorities. I mean, I say thankfully because then they didn't send us back. They detained
yeah,
us for a couple of weeks, and then my father paid some sort of bail or bond
yeah,
fee, and then they let us go, right? And then, I mean, the process obviously took, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 decades for us to
Mhm.
finally like get our green cards and become naturalized. But it happened, right?
Yes,
Like, and if it hadn't happened, I, right, like I was able to go to a state school, state college in Florida. My tuition, everything was paid for because I was a resident. At that time, I became a naturalized citizen.
yeah,
Um, it's obviously not the same now where,
yeah, yeah,
even like children where, yeah, all of us were kids. It was myself and my three siblings, all under, right, the age of like 14, 15, and my mom. And it's just astonishing and repulsive to me that, right, that you have elected
right. It's
officials.
mortifying. It's
Yeah,
mortifying.
that,
And I'm
yeah.
hearing you say all this and say you were one of the lucky ones. I mean, that sounds like hell to me, but that's being described as one of the lucky ones. And And look, at the end of the day, I was joking about this the other day. I have a lot of negative things to say about Reagan, and I will continue to because he was a terrible president. One thing that he would be called a woke left liberal is because he talked about amnesty, he talked about asylum, he even talked about open borders with Mexico for economic migrants and being able to go back and forth. He literally used the word open borders. I mean, he would be, probably crucified right now by the modern day Republican MAGA party. And I think your experience, it's so important that people hear it because now they see someone who's successful and has earned every single bit of what you've done. But it was a fusion of your drive, determination, your parents' drive, determination, and the opportunities afforded here. That's
Mhm.
what is supposed to be this country. It shouldn't take 2 decades to get basic citizenship status because that's how you incentivize bad behavior as well. That's how you incentivize people trying to cut in line when it takes, 20 years to get a piece of paper. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for continuing to speak truths to power. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about what's happening with Iran. Um, Donald Trump ignored the requirement, the constitutional requirement of congressional approval, struck Iran at 3 facilities, claimed victory, a total and a complete obliteration, which echoed very similar to Iraq's mission accomplished mantra. And now we find out that actually, no, all you did was just move things around for a few weeks, maybe a few months, but didn't actually cause any damage. All this in the backdrop of having unilaterally broken the Iran nuclear program treaty, which required Iran to be compliant with international standards, which they were, and now claiming that because they're not coming to the table, you have to resort to war. I mean, it's just so asinine and ass backwards. It's insufferable. But we were just talking about how the American people feel about it, and in a minute we'll talk about how Iranians feel about it. But share a little bit about the work you've been doing on how the American people feel about this and how you and your organization are fighting back against this, just grave injustice against constitutional rights that we need to protect.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think you rightly noted, Qasim, that the reason why we're here in this position right now is, as you noted, President Trump unilaterally left, tore up the
Yeah.
JCPOA, is the Iran deal that the US was entered into in 2015. This is the Obama deal. He left it in 2018. I mean, despite the guidance from his own cabinet, so Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, his national security advisor, all of them were telling him that don't leave this deal. It's working, right? This
Yeah.
was the only way to be able to resolve Iran's nuclear program effectively, transparently, and peacefully is through diplomacy. It's through the Iran deal. Um, so yeah, I think it's important for your viewers to know that like how we got here. And
Mhm.
we got here as a result of, lack of commitment from the current administration to actually resolving and addressing Iran's nuclear program, effectively through diplomatic means. And when you noted with the US's unauthorized and unconstitutional strikes on those nuclear facilities in Iran, that whether they were successful or not, I think it's pretty obvious that,
Yeah.
you know, it's not what he claims. So,
No, no. Well, he
um,
telegraphs his plans on social media. Like you don't need much more than two brain cells to realize what he's about to do. And obviously, the Iranians aren't stupid. Like they can read and
yeah.
just they're telegraphing it. And anyway, I didn't mean to cut you off, but you're right. Like it
Oh,
was not
yeah.
successful. Everything he does,
Yeah.
he exaggerates to make it seem like it was. But yeah, please continue. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah. But I think it's important to note that, I mean, I was concerned when I again like saw the news coverage and the initial assessments of the intelligence community saying, there's little damage, was not successful, that the opposition would actually use those claims against us, and they would say, "Oh, then, President Trump, please go in again and strike again, and you need to keep doing it. And Israel, you need to keep, continuing to strike Iran over and over again until, these facilities are completely destroyed." And I just want to kind of underscore and highlight that there's no military solution to
Yeah.
this. It's just no amount of strikes is going to be helpful or effective. The only way we were able to kind of monitor Iran's program was right, like it was this robust deal that was crafted multilateral, where there was consistent, continuous inspections by IAEA, right, of their facilities, making sure that the enrichment was limited to a certain level. So, I mean, we don't have any of that right now because there's no deal. So I just want to kind of point out that like regardless of the talking points that kind of the war machine and war hawks like to put out to
Yeah.
say that, oh, like military solution is 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 going to work and we need to keep doing it. It's the complete opposite. It's counterproductive.
Completely. I mean, and so someone put out this tweet that I thought was hilarious that this attack on Iran will definitely work because after invading Afghanistan for 20 years to remove the Taliban, we've now left them with the Taliban. And after invading Iraq and destroying Saddam Hussein, we've left them with Daesh and the remnants of militant
Yeah.
organizations. And
Yeah.
so no, it's not going to work. This is modern day colonialism
Yeah.
in all its disgustingness. If you're just
It is.
tuning in, we're speaking with Yasmine Taeb, legislative and political director at Empower Change, a brilliant civil rights organization based out of DC. You guys are taking action. This last week, there have been some votes on the War Powers Resolution by Senator Tim Kaine. And what's fascinating to me is to see on the House side, there's actually bipartisan support for this. You've got someone as far left as Ro Khanna, and as far right as Thomas Massie, who don't really agree on much, but on this principle, they're extraordinarily well aligned that the president cannot just unilaterally wage war on another country, and we need to stop waging war, period, right? This is the guy who ran on the peacetime president mantra. Obviously, we knew he was lying, but talk a little bit about this war powers resolution and the work you guys are doing to create more awareness.
Sure. So we are building an immense amount of support for these war powers resolution. I mean, in a matter of few hours after the introduction of them, so I like had been coordinating and organizing over 100 organizations that represent millions of their members across the country, including Indivisible, Human Rights First, Center for Constitutional Rights, I mean, Public Citizen, if not now movement, and so forth. All of these organizations have endorsed Senator Kaine and Representatives Massie and Khanna's War Powers resolution. Senator Kaine's in particular, we are expecting a vote his on his War Powers resolution on Thursday, June 26th. So it's going to be a really critical vote. And as you noted, Qasim, it's important to note that there's bipartisan support for the House resolution. There's at least at this point 70 members of Congress. There's 67 members that had sponsored or co-sponsored the Massie Khanna that I saw just as of yesterday, and it's incredibly important that these members stand with their constituents, stand with the American people. Um, the American people have been unequivocal that they do not want a war with Iran. The polling is clear. I mean, if you just mention, like, talk about the Democratic caucus, what is it, over 80, the recent poll, over 80% of Democratic
7%.
voters rejected and opposed the US strikes on Iran. Uh, so I think these members are, they understand how important this is for their constituents, and
Yeah.
I hope that, yeah, and I hope that they
Well,
vote the right way.
and it's a consistent standard from Democrats in general. I would say from Americans, I have to look at the polling for the full country, but I remember last summer when Biden was continuing to arm Netanyahu to bomb Palestinians, there was poll after poll that I think shocked a lot of people. 77% of Democrats, 63% of independents, and 61% of Republicans wanted Biden to stop arming Netanyahu. When you've got 61% of Republicans saying no more war, and you continue to persist, you're not listening to the country. And now I think under Trump, that number has only gone up. 87% of Democrats. I'm sure Republicans are a significantly high number. My conservative friends are not particularly happy about this either. Yeah, you got some, I think MAGA nut jobs who suddenly had their brain chip altered to now be pro-war after voting to be anti-war. That's kind of being in a cult, if you ask me. But I think it's important that politicians listen at this point. I think Americans are sick and tired of this. One question, Yasmin, I wanted to ask you, and I'm getting this from my listeners and my followers a lot, is how do we support the Iranian people? Because obviously, we can't sit here and praise the Iranian, government as some, beacon of democracy. It's not. It's the theocratic regime. It's dictatorial. There's, suppression of journalists and of faith minorities and just marginalized communities in general. But I think the Iranian people would be the first ones to tell you we don't want some foreign war to come in and take out our government and destroy our country. So how can people be supportive of the people of Iran? How can they help advocate for democratic reforms in a meaningful, in a lasting, and a consequential way?
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right, Awesome, in that the Iranian people, I mean, after again the illegal strikes on Iran by Israel, and after the unconstitutional, unauthorized strikes on Iran by the
Right.
U.S. The Iranian civil society was completely united against any sort of foreign intervention. They were incredibly um, not only just enraged at what was happening, but I like my entire extended family lives in Iran. So I obviously, for very personal reasons, was also incredibly invested in trying to ensure that we push for de-escalation, for ceasefire, for diplomacy. Most of my family lives all across Tehran. We couldn't even communicate with them, as you probably know. Internet was cut off. And it was, I mean, the Iranian government's claim to that was they felt as though the Israeli intelligence was spying, so they had to cut off all communications. They were just right, like they didn't trust anything.
Yeah.
So, but it made it so incredibly hard for us to be also able to communicate with our own loved ones and friends and family. But I can tell you that the Iranian people are incredibly resilient. They're incredibly very educated, very smart, and they want to be able to push for reforms on their own terms. They absolutely do not support any sort of foreign military intervention. As you probably saw, there were certain individuals, namely Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah of Iran, who was pushing all of this propaganda. It was disgusting, all of this propaganda, calling on the Iranian people to rise up, to take over, defeat their government, while he's sitting at a computer, hundreds of thousands of miles away, safely in his apartment, probably in Maryland, right? So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think that the best way to do so is just call for diplomacy, continue to push for no war with Iran, take action, support the Iranian people, and I think that's the best way.
And I think the model is already there. I mean, we saw the Iran deal that President Obama enacted. That didn't happen just magically. Like it was civil society in the United States that worked with civil society in Iran, scientists in the United States working with scientists in Iran to make it happen and to partner with government. That was an extraordinarily a Herculean lift. It didn't just happen because Obama called up Iran's government and said, "Hey, let's sign this thing." It was years in the making. And it was difficult. And I think that's kind of part of the answer, right? That this is not easy stuff. It is hard because it matters and it's supposed to be lasting. And I'm willing to bet, as much as I distrust the Iranian government, I'm willing to bet that if there was an international coalition that had safeguards to prevent another, unilateral Trumpian release, that the Iranian government would still say, we've got no desire to invade another country or to drop a nuclear weapon in another country. We just want to have access to things like electricity because it's
Right.
2025 and it's helpful to do that. So thank you for sharing that. And I think that nuance between the Iranian people and the government is important. I've always said that I wouldn't mind a new government here in the United States, but I don't want some foreign country violently invading and
Right.
bombing Washington. That's insane to me.
Right. Yeah.
Um, Yasmin, how can folks connect with you offline? How can they support you and your advocacy and your work going forward?
Sure. Well, thank you so much. Viewers can reach out to me at my organization. My email is it's just my first name at empowerchange.org. And then we do have an action that your viewers can take, and that's empoweraction.org/no war on Iran. And yeah, I'm happy to connect and be helpful. And thank you so much, Qasim, for everything you're doing, for having me on.
Absolutely. When we'll have you back on in the future. It's a shame it took me this long to invite you, but I'm so glad that you graciously made time. That was Yasmine Taeb, somebody I've known for a long time and deeply admire. Our next guest is also someone that I deeply admire, Tim Whitaker, founder of the New Evangelicals, aspiring male model, overall brilliant thought leader. Tim, good to have you with us.
If I was an aspiring model, I would not have such thinning hair, Qasim,
No,
you know,
hey,
so.
bald is beautiful. According to the latest, what's that show on HBO? White Lotus. That receding hairlines are in style. So I think I'm good.
Oh,
Yeah, they're in
oh,
style now. That's the thing. That's the thing.
wow. Did not
Um,
know that.
I understand you have a gift you want us to play for our audience.
Oh, I do. I just want to give your audience, I grew up a conservative evangelical fundamentalist. I want your audience to kind of hear how I was taught to think about the Middle East and things that were happening in the Middle East, and the end of the world. This is a real clip by a megachurch pastor, and the saddest part about this clip is that it has over 250,000 shares on Instagram.
Cheers. Wow. All right.
Cheers.
Alexa, let's roll that clip. It's like 90 seconds, right? So let's
Yeah.
roll.
The Bible says that this attack at the end of time will come on Israel from the north and the south, and that will be the final war, the war to end all wars that will usher in the end of time. Now, here's the question. Are we entering into that war right now? In Ezekiel 38 and 39, it mentions nations Gog and Magog. That would be like modern day Russia. It also mentions Persia in Ezekiel 38 and 39. That corresponds to modern day Iran. What we do know is that if Iran enters the war, that Turkey and Russia will probably go with them. Right behind them will be North Korea and China. And if all of the world powers start attacking from the north and the south, start trying to attack Israel, that could be the war to end all wars that ushers in the end of history. You may be going right now like, bro, this is heavy, man. Can I just say this? There's a lot of hope in Ezekiel 38 and 39. Because we know how that battle ends. But the Bible says exactly at the moment when it looks like all hope is lost for the descendants of Isaac, that the Lord himself, Jesus Christ, will descend. He will take the battlefield and he will win the war once and for all time.
All right, so let's talk about that, Tim, because it sounds, and if you watch the clip, you mentioned this to me offline, is that the guy's smiling. He's like giggly and glee. Like he looks like my 9-year-old when I tell her we're going to get ice cream, that like something great. And he's talking about just the mass destruction of all humanity. We're talking, if there's a global nuclear war, we're talking billions of people, not just thousands or millions of billions. And he's gleefully joyful about that. Walk me through that psychology, because our last guest, we talked about, Iran and bombing Iran, and how 87% of Democrats in the US don't want to bomb Iran, and the Iranian people don't want a violent overthrow of their regime, even though they disagree with their theocratic regime. They don't want a violent overthrow of it. Walk me through the mentality of this right-wing mentality of pushing for war in some weird way to hasten the end days and hasten the return of Jesus.
Okay, I'm going to try and summarize it quickly. There's a lot here, but essentially, this is the clip you just heard. The pastor's name is Josh Howerton. He's a mega church pastor, and he really does summarize what many white evangelicals believe about the end times. This particular theology is not actually held by most Christians worldwide. This is really unique to American evangelicalism, and it comes out of a type of theology called dispensationalism. And it's this idea that essentially God is dealing with humanity in different dispensations over the course of human history, okay? And that we're in one of the last, if not the last dispensation before the end times. And here's the ironic part. I was taught that this idea was a biblical, historic Christian idea. This theology was invented in the 19th century largely by someone named John Nelson Darby. Okay, so this theology that I was taught as absolute truth is actually a brand new development in Christian thinking, and he develops this idea called the rapture and the tribulation. If anyone grew up like me who's listening, you might have heard of the Left Behind books. It's this fictional set of books, but it's based on this rapture idea where in the blink of an eye, all the Christians will get sucked up to heaven, and then the tribulation or the time where God pours out his wrath on the unbelieving world starts. It's full of chaos and destruction. And for that to happen, certain things, according to dispensationalists and rapture believers, certain things need to happen in the Middle East. One of the big things was the nation state of Israel being formed again. Okay, because there's a verse in the Bible, allegedly, about how God will gather his people back to himself. They take that as, look, Israel has a nation state again. And so when that happened, a lot of people said, oh my gosh, we're getting closer and closer to the end time. During the Cold War, people would interpret parts of Revelation being Russia or being other parts of that area, saying, look, we're on the brink of the edge and or the brink of the end. And a similar thing with that clip you just heard, this idea of, there's going to be an all-out war in the Middle East between the North and the South attacking Israel that will usher in the end of the world. So this is just kind of what they're taught. And for them, they read it as we're getting closer and closer to the rapture, to when true Christians get raptured out of here and the whole world goes to hell. One thing I do want to add, though, is that this belief is ironically incredibly anti-Semitic, because they really believe that most Jewish people in Israel are going to die or be converted to Christianity. That's a huge part of this in the end time world. So even though American evangelicals are really in favor of Israel no matter what, and they always have been, it's not because they deeply care about the Jewish people or the nation of Israel. It's because for them, that moment of Israel becoming a nation again is just one step closer to God unleashing a global bloodbath where most people die and in their theology go to hell forever.
And I want to first of all, thank you for summarizing all of that so concisely and effectively. And I want to double down on this point that it's extraordinarily anti-Semitic, and their support of Israel has nothing to do with the support of a Jewish homeland or the belief that Jewish people deserve safety and security. Their support of it, as they admit themselves, is because they believe that Jesus will descend and give them a choice by some interpretations to convert or die, or by some other interpretations just die right away.
Yep.
And they need to collect the Jews there like their Pokemon cards so that they can, bring about this. And I mean, it's as disgusting as you can get. It's dehumanizing, it's tokenizing, it's basically like, hey, you're the bait for this, shark to come and eat, and then we're saved. It's nonsensical. What, and I've heard you talk about this, but when did this start? I mean, how did this start? Because you don't find this kind of writing in Christian theology from 1,000 years ago. It's really kind of the last 150, 200 years that this rapture ideology has kind of come to fruition. Was it as a result of people got tired of waiting, or people are like, well, we thought he'd be back by now and he's not, so something really big must be happening. What's kind of been the genesis? And then after that, I'm going to ask you, after I hear your response, how do we counter it? But what is kind of the genesis of why this started?
Well, look, I mean, first off, I think the end of the world is just a human question that we all have asked ourselves, right? There's different traditions, have different thoughts. I mean, there was the movie 2012, right, based on the end of the Mayan calendar, loosely, I'm sure. But again, there's always different ideas.
Blaspheme 2012 on this show.
I'm sorry.
That was brilliant on that.
I'm sure it was amazing. I have no doubt. But my point is that, there is just the general human question of when will the world end? How will it end? Different cultures think about it differently. Look, I mean, the Apostle Paul in the scriptures, he thought he was in the last days. He thought that Christ was coming back in his time. So this is a common theme in the Christian psyche, for sure, of when Christ will return. That's a pretty historical Christian belief that one day Christ will come back and he'll work with humanity to make all the crooked parts of the world, right again, justice on earth, etc. This idea, though, of this rapture theology really comes out of that more 19th century European thought with this person named John Nelson Darby. Now, of course, it's never just one person, but John Nelson Darby, he's the person who kind of popularized this. And originally, it was a fringe belief. Most people didn't really buy it. I also think we have to acknowledge, too, what's happening with World War I, World War II at some point, right? Because we all can say that obviously what happened during the Holocaust was horrific. And you can see how people are thinking, well, what do we do now to protect Jewish people? Because we just saw what happened in World War II. So there is this idea of Christian Zionism in general that's kind of in the air between the 18th, 19th, 20th century of, do the Jewish people have a homeland? Do they have a nation state? Again, originally this idea is pretty fringe. My understanding is even in Judaism, this idea was pretty fringe for a long time. But in light of certain cataclysmic events aimed at the Jewish people, the tide starts to turn. So I think that there are a lot of factors kind of all playing into this.
Yeah.
And then more recently, with books like Left Behind or Late Great Planet Earth, there is just this white Christian fundamentalism ideology of like, we are the chosen ones and we're going to get out of here and the world can kind of go to hell. So I think, especially with that fiction being sold almost as like, this is a loosely based on a true story kind of vibe, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, and look, I grew up as a child being taught this. So when you're a kid, you're just taught this is how it goes. There are songs about the rapture that you're taught. So it just drills deeply into the psyche of a child. And last thing I'll say is that what scares me the most, Qasim, is that many politicians in our government believe this. Mike Huckabee maybe is one of the most prolific people who believe this. I'm sure you saw his 3-paragraph long text about how Trump is being chosen by God and hears from the voice of heaven. This is all baked into Huckabee's, psyche and theology, and he's the ambassador to Israel. So a lot of people in the Christian nationalist world who have a lot of political power believe that we are really in the last days and that they have to kind of push it along to kind of make it happen.
It's mortifying, and not to make this religious, but well, it's already religious, but from in the Islamic perspective, there's no concept of this exclusivity of heaven, that I get to go and I'm in the one true religion and nobody else gets to go. It's kind of it's considered to be insulting to God's grace and mercy, that it's somehow limiting God's grace and mercy. But there's a verse in the Quran that I often think about, where God is addressing those who believe that only they're going to go to paradise. And God says to them that if you truly believe that heaven is exclusive to you, while removing all others, then you should wish for death. But you won't wish for death because you know it's not true. And so it's calling out these folks that, and the basic thing is, if you think heaven is just the greatest thing that ever happened, and it's brilliant beyond all of our wonders, why wouldn't you want to get there as fast as possible? But it's not true. And that's why you don't wish for that. And it's just a way for you to exert power and control. It's your ego you're worshiping. It's certainly not God the Almighty. So how do we counter this, Tim? Because it's one thing for a person to have a crazy belief, and I'm not here to tell them what they should or shouldn't believe. That's cool. You do what you think is best for you. That's fine. Yeah. There's no compulsion in religion. My beef is when the person suddenly says, therefore, we need to bomb Iran. Therefore, we're going to enable genocide of Palestinians. Therefore, we're going to deport human trafficking and remove people who we think are contrary to God's kingdom cometh. How do we stop it? Because that's where we are right now. We've got the people who should be in the insane asylum running the insane asylum. And we're seeing demonstrable harm. I mean, one example is gutting U.S. aid. Studies are showing that it has already killed 300,000 people globally, majority children. It's killing people suffering from AIDS. I mean, this is nonsensical and cruel and fascistic and completely contrary to everything that faith and love of God should teach. So this is a long question just to kind of vent a little bit, but how do we stop it? How do we counter this right-wing evangelical extremism?
Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to actually name it correctly. And I appreciate you calling it what it is. And I think too many people in the media refuse to call this, this is not fascism. This is Christian fascism. There's a Christian element to what's happening here. I would argue it's one of the core drivers of what we're seeing in when it comes to foreign policy, et cetera. And by the way, it's been in the waters in America for a long, long time. So first we have to actually acknowledge what the problem is. We have people who believe that they are chosen by God to make America great again, and that looks like making it as white as possible, as cruel as possible, and the world be damned. That's the first thing. The second thing is we have to just help people who maybe grew up like I did understand that, hey, that this stuff isn't like super historic. Like, for example, I actually did a Instagram series on this exact thing, the rapture, earlier this week on our Instagram account, the New Evangelicals. And most people were like, wait, I had no idea that this was like invented largely in the 19th century, right? So the education piece is huge. And then the other side of this too is how do we build broad coalitions to offer a counter narrative that is much more compelling to the average American who's never going to know exactly what's driving all of this, right? We
Yeah.
absolutely need people to say, look, why is it that we live in the world's wealthiest country, which of course, we all know that we acquired that wealth by colonization and empire,
Yeah.
but regardless, we have it. Why is it that in the world's richest country, most Americans are afraid to call the ambulance lest they go into medical debt?
Right.
Why is that? Why
Horrifying.
is that a thing? Why is it so and so that you work 40, 60, 80 hours a week and you still are in significant debt just to cover your own expenses, right? And also I think the last thing is we got to call the right wing out for their hypocrisy. You know what's not pro family? Not having affordable healthcare or paid family leave, right? Or livable wages. Those are not pro-family policies. And somehow the right, in particular the Christian right, has convinced people that they're the party of pro-life and pro-family values as they support regimes that are either committing mass genocide, right? Or they're celebrating the bombing of Iran, or they're like, hey, you know what? If you have a baby, you got to pay for all the medical expenses, no paid time off, and also your wife has to stay at home because that's God's way. What? Nothing. None of this makes sense when you actually examine what they're advocating for, and we have to start calling that out.
Well said. And I think that advocacy is going to be a critical component. This is where, we have to resist the feeling of hopelessness that our voice doesn't matter.
Yes.
It does. It makes a difference. It has an impact. And we have to understand that we're not here because these folks flipped on a switch and suddenly, we're at war with Iran. This was the result of years of advocacy, years of
Yes.
lobbying, years of, you talk about the Left Behind books, the sequel to Top Gun. It was not subtle that we were at war with Iran in the sequel to Top Gun. This was also done
Mm,
in the late 90s. You probably recall this as well. Executive Decision. A lot of these movies were about war with Muslim majority countries. And
yes.
there's a huge movement in Hollywood, in the movie industry, where they have contracts with the military, and the military will go to them and they'll consult back and forth on movie ideas. And there's a lot of evidence, a lot of research that talks about how it's very deliberate in kind of
Mm,
priming the pump. There was a research paper about some of the major wars in the 90s, like Saving Private Ryan, The Thin Red Line, that kind of brought back the glory of war, because Vietnam had been 20, 25 years as Vietnam, and we hadn't been in
mm.
a war. People forget the United States has been at war for 92% of its existence.
Wow.
92%. Only 8% of our existence have we been in peacetime. And so
Wow.
if you put that onto Iran, for example, if you said, Iran's been at war 92% of existence, we'd be like, well, yep, that's
Right.
radical Islamic terrorism. That's
Yes.
Al Qaeda. We would say that right away. But we need to call it out for what it is. This is right-wing Christian evangelical nationalism. Now, I think we can both agree, you as a Christian, me as a Muslim, that this is completely contrary to the teachings of Jesus Christ, completely contrary to everything what Christ actually taught. But it's important that we recognize that these self-described extremists are claiming that they're Christian, and it's important we take back that narrative. If you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Tim Whitaker, founder of the New Evangelicals. And Tim, your content online really does an excellent job of kind of dismantling, deconstructing a lot of these evangelical spaces, while maintaining your identity as a Christian. And I love that, because you're separating the extremism from the experience that you have as someone who's kind of seen it firsthand and recognized, hold on a second, this is contrary to my humanity. I'd love for you to kind of chat a bit personally about what was the trigger moment for you to say, this is not right. My feelings and my actions aren't matching. I need to make a change.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like anything, it's a long story, but I think a few of the big key changes for me was one, realizing that my tradition really hated gay people. I didn't understand why. Now, look, I mean, as a conservative evangelical, I agreed with their theology that being gay is sinful, but I never understood like why are we focusing on those people all the time when there are other quote unquote sins that we could be talking about, like greed, etc. That was one of the first ones early on. But honestly, I think one of the biggest moments where the dam really broke was definitely Trump. You know, it was very jarring watching people who raised me in church, who gave me this really strict sexual ethic of saving myself for marriage, then telling me that if I don't vote for the guy on the cover of Playboy on his third marriage who brags about grabbing women, somehow I don't have a Christian political ethic. I was like, guys, I'm just trying to be consistent with what you taught me. You taught me never to compromise these values. So ultimately, I mean, look, I don't want to sound too whatever here, but I rebelled against my tradition because of my allegiance to Jesus. Like I never shifted that. That part has always stayed in my life. It's just evolved over time. And that's why I say, Qasim, that Christian nationalism is Christian. There are unfortunately militant strains of Christianity throughout its identity and history, but it is antichrist in nature. You have to literally deny the teachings of Christ to understand and to participate in the ideology and actions that Christian nationalists believe in. I mean, one example is Jesus teaches us clearly to love your enemies, and Christian nationalists are looking to build crosses to crucify their enemies on. It's a complete contradiction of how Jesus taught his followers to live.
Beautifully said. Tim, how can folks find you online? How can they support you and get involved with your advocacy and your work?
Sure. Well, if they want to follow the organization that I started, it's called the New Evangelicals. We have a podcast, YouTube, Instagram, and a Substack now. It's coming out end of July, which is super exciting. And then if you want to follow me personally, my social media accounts are Tim Whitaker Speaks. I just started a Substack, thanks to you, Qasim, for convincing me to start that. I'm on Instagram, and my DMs are open. Happy to talk to you anytime.
I'm a Substack evangelical.
You really are. You are. You're preaching the gospel of Substack.
I am the gospel of Substack. Yeah.
And you converted me. I've converted.
There we go. Done. That's where I got my first convert. I love it.
I love it.
Tim, love your voice, love your empathy, love what you bring to the table. We'll have to have you back on soon to keep talking about these issues. Tim Whitaker Speaks is where you can find him online. Check out his organization, the New Evangelicals, a brilliant organization that is just doing the Lord's work, literally. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 12060, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. That was Tim Whitaker. Follow him at Tim Whitaker Speaks across social media platforms. And you can also support his the organization he founded, the New Evangelicals, at just the New Evangelicals. They do phenomenal work combating much of the right-wing Christian nationalism that we're seeing. Look, folks, we're at a very strange time in modern American history. We don't know if we're at war. We might be, we might not be. Part of the problem is Republicans who claim to have been running on peace are suddenly happy with war again because the modern day MAGA party is not a legitimate party, in my view. They are just the party of Trump. It's a cult. They just do whatever he wants them to do. And that's just a really, really big problem. We also have to grapple with the fact that there are complicit Democrats. Unfortunately, there are. There was a vote last week on impeaching Trump, and only 71 Democrats voted for it. And I know we don't have the power to get a majority vote, but if you're not even going to show up and show the people that you're willing to fight, what kind of a message are you sending? It's infuriating. I mean, the man violated the US Constitution by trying to wage war unilaterally against Iran. Could have sparked a global war, especially if Russia and China get involved, because it pissed them off too. And you can't be, so much bothered to show up to say, hey, this is wrong. It's a violation of the Constitution. I'm really hoping that the lessons that Mamdani showed is a lesson that others adopt, and we get rid of these complicit corporate Dems and elect people who are actually committed to working people, actually committed towards fighting for our civil rights. And I say that not as someone who's bitter or angry, but somebody who is focused on protecting the human rights of every person in this country, regardless of background and status. That's what we should be called to do. That's what we need to accomplish. All right, y'all. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you're listening on Substack. Be sure to follow us on all platforms at Qasim Rashid, because it is your support that makes this advocacy possible. You have my promise and commitment to continue to advocate and build a show that advances compassion and justice and accountability for those in power. We got a great show lined up for next week. Be sure to tune in, same time, same place at 10 a.m. Eastern on Sunday on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126. Obviously, this goes live on Monday on my Substack at Qasim Rashid. Let's address this with Qasim Rashid, my friends. Be fierce, lead with compassion and justice, and continue speaking truth to power. Until next week, peace.